Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by a best-selling psychological thriller author. It's Ruth Heald. Hi, Ruth. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jamie. It's really good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. For people listening, just to give a sort of better sense of what you write, other than me just saying psychological thriller, why don't you tell us a little bit about your latest novel, The Party on Laurel Street, which came out in June this year?
Yeah, sure. So The Party on Laurel Street is about, in 25 years ago, there were three little girls aged 10, and there was a New Year's Eve party on their street that all their parents were at, and they decided to escape and have their own party in the woods behind the kind of country estate where they all live. Now, at that little kind of midnight feast type party, one of them then disappeared and was never seen again. And now, 25 years later, the two other girls, women now in their 30s, are both living back in that street. So Mel, who's the protagonist, has just inherited her grandmother's house in the street, and her friend Gabby, who was also at the midnight feast, is already living there with her husband. And at the time that the girl went missing, their friend, the maintenance man who did a lot of work on this country estate, he was the main suspect. And now Mel's moved back to the street. He seems to be making a reappearance in the shadows, and she feels he's following her. Her friend also feels like that. And then her friend also disappears. So now two of the three, and also after a party. So now two of the three girls are not there, and what happened to them, what will happen to Mel, kind of what kind of role can she play in finding her friend, what happened in the past, etc., etc. So that's the kind of basic premise.
It's a very interesting. I'm fascinated to know where that story begins for you. Like, do you start with the thing that happens in the past, or do you start with the characters in the present and think, oh, what's the thing that is like holding them back, that happened to them, that scarred them from when they were younger?
That's such an interesting question. So for that book, it was definitely the thing in the past. I like the idea of children kind of slightly not neglected, but not watched properly, and what they might do, the fun they might have, but also the danger they could get into and the complexity of that. So that one certainly started in the past with a kind of image of the woods. And then I think as I kind of move forward in my career and have written more and more books, I'm trying to match different ideas that I have. So for the setting for that, of a kind of, it's a country estate, so there's a former big house and then cottages that would work as cottages around it on the lane street. So I wanted to use that kind of quite evocative setting in the middle of nowhere, a close-knit community, trying to match kind of different things that I want to do, I think. So the setting came quite early on as well. And then it was actually quite a hard book to write. I think the present day aspect of it proved quite difficult. I'm not quite sure why. Sometimes books come out really, really simply and easily, and sometimes they don't. And it's hard to know the difference, really. But thinking about my other books, so The Nanny, that's about a baby who goes missing this time in Thailand, and the nanny looking after the baby is accused. And I think that definitely the nub again was that past story, and not so much the present day story. So I think I'm trying to think about my other books. I think generally it's the past story is the most interesting, and then the present day bit for me is the jigsaw of who is this person now, how does their past influence them, what kind of threat are they under today? Because I feel like there always has to be a threat in the past and a threat today. And it's the combination of those things and how they relate that kind of drives the story forward.
Yeah, it's a really interesting structure to write stories with, because on the outside, it's like, oh, there's a thing in the past which catches up to them. But then I guess you also use that very cleverly to sort of be like, this is actually the character study, and the thing that happened in their past is just the sort of the events that informed the character that they are today. So it kind of you're blending the two of like the literal action that's happening with the sort of subconscious character development that and the sort of origin of where that character has come from and why they are the way they are now.
Yeah, yeah. So depending on when the past was, it can be something, their kind of flaw in the first place may have influenced what they did in the past, say if they're an adult, and then they kind of go on a journey sometimes to learn from that flaw in those events and to kind of almost rectify it in the present. And at other times when it's like not their fault at all, then it's much more about how it's affecting them today.
Yeah. Going off what we've just talked about, I'm going to guess that you are someone that plans novels.
Well, yes and no. So I always write a plan.
Okay.
And I really enjoy writing plans. Okay. I love doing a spreadsheet. I love laying it all out, color coding it, all of that stuff. But well, the other side of my personality is I really hate following plans. So, unfortunately, so I always have a plan. I'm always quite happy with it. I'm always pleased with it in and as itself as a plan. But the reality is the book that comes from that plan is very rarely anything to do with it. Or like it can be, but the premise and the subject will probably remain the same. The ending often remains the same or similar. But the stuff in the middle, I think it's hard, with a plan, because a summary can never capture what happens in the book, really, a chapter by chapter summary. And you just don't know how those points are going to turn out, or like your character you're writing about a birthday party in one chapter or something, and then turns out they do something completely different to what you'd expect. And then lots of drama can come from that. And if you go back to your plan and the next scene might be something quite, you haven't really thought about it, sounds a bit dull. Like it easily goes off track, I think, from a plan quite early on. And you really have to, well, in my experience of the way my mind works, I really have to let it go off track. Because if I'm trying to force it back onto the track that I've planned, then it comes out quite stale. I think the writing is much harder to work like that for me.
Writers that I've spoken to or that I know who go for a more like pantser, like make it up as you go approach, that's the issue that they always have the planning, is that they're like, it doesn't feel organic. Like they can't make it work with a plan and keep it the way that they want to write it. I'm wondering so you have your plan and then you start writing it. Presumably you do stick, as you start, you are on the plan, and then eventually you'll go off the rails. When you do veer away from the planned route, do you literally does the plan just sort of, it's like you just chuck it out the window at that point, or is it always there as like a reference, and like even though you're sort of very far off it at that point, are you still sort of vaguely referring to it to see if maybe you can bring this back on track?
Well, funnily enough, I'm writing my book 9, my 9th psychological. Oh no, book 8. Sorry, I'm getting confused. Book 8 of my psychological thrillers at the moment, and I wrote a plan, and I was happy with it, more or less. And then I started writing. I'm not writing in order. I'm just writing the scenes that come to me.
Oh, okay.
And I've decided I'm not going to look again at that original plan until the end.
Okay.
And then see if there's anything from a plan that I want to put in. Because often, so 1-page synopsis, it has so little detail in, it will just have the key twists and the kind of key points. But I don't think you can really write a book of that. It's quite hard. I mean, you can try and write to the midpoint, you can try and write to the twist. But actually, as you're going through, you think of better twists, you think of better midpoints. Your midpoint ends up being like 3 chapters in instead of in the middle, because actually, if you've only thought about those points, you haven't got anything else to put in.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's too tricky to go at the end and look at the synopsis and see if there's a few more things that I need to plug into the story to make it just a few like little extra twists that might not be the main twists anymore. In fact, I've no idea how much this has gone off the rails. It may not have done, but the point is, when I start to look at those plans, it's often confusing because you're trying to then shoehorn in plot points that worked in a kind of 200-word synopsis, but actually your characters they've got slightly different personalities, behaving slightly differently, more interesting things have happened.
Yeah.
That it's kind of like you're then almost putting together two separate stories and forcing them together. And I don't think that works particularly well, because over the years I've tried to do that kind of thing. And it just makes life harder, and you end up deleting so much. So this time I'm not looking too closely at it, but when it comes to the end and when I have to submit that, I'll just double check to see if there's anything I can kind of put in from it. I think the point for me is that with my editor, the exciting points and the premise that we talk about and we get excited about and chat about, those are the points that still have to be there. When I then go away and write the synopsis, I'm kind of trying to perform to a structure. And not every point in that synopsis is the point that excited me and my editor. Sometimes those points are just to fill the synopsis and make it a sensible structure that will kind of keep the reader reading. So I feel like as long as I've still got the points that excited us in the first place, it's okay to deviate. That's my personal view. I don't know, really. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear my editor's view, actually. She may feel entirely differently. But I think you just have to keep the excitement and the passion and the reason you both decided that was the right plot more than the detail of how that plot is executed.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, sort of a hybridization of you like to make a plan, but you're very happy to go off the plan and sort of make it up. It's. I've not heard people probably do that approach. Maybe they haven't told me, but I've not heard anyone explicitly explain it like that. It's an interesting process to do.
And it's not like the plan is valueless, because I'm not saying I'm making a plan just for the sake of making a plan. I get a lot of value in making that plan because it makes me think of lots of alternative plot points. And sometimes I'll write one version and actually I want to change something, and I'll realize subconsciously I then go back to something in the original plan, but I had to kind of go through that process to realize that point worked rather than something else, or one of the other threads will have changed and it will make more sense. So I guess it's like a jigsaw puzzle, but with like lots of different pieces that sometimes fit. But when you change, like you're changing the jigsaw all the time. It's not the same picture. Like you're starting and you're trying to make one picture and then you change it into a slightly different picture. And then the picture at the end is a combination of the plan and the first draft, but it's neither. If that makes any sense.
If anyone followed that, you understand how Ruth's process works.
Yeah. So it's not entirely logical, perhaps, but it works. So
you've obviously honed this in over many books and lots of writing so that like you get it and this is what you figured out, the thing that works for you, which is great.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, you are working on your it was eighth book.
Yeah. Eighth psychological thriller. It's my ninth book. Yes. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And all of your thrillers, they are standalone stories, right?
Yes,
you haven't done any sequels. Yeah. Would you ever do sequels?
I find it quite hard in this genre to do a sequel.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Because the way my books, because they're so often about past secrets, then they're kind of used up in the first one. I think I know some people have successfully done really good sequels. I think for me, the way to do it would be to follow a character, like just one character into a sequel rather than the whole cast, if you see what I mean, because you need to have a new cast to make mistakes, to develop all of that kind of thing. So I think it is possible. I don't think any of my books as they stand would suit
a sequel.
No,
that makes sense.
I wouldn't rule it out in the future, but at the moment I haven't designed them in that way that would suit, really.
Do you think of your books as all existing in the same like universe?
Yeah. I mean, my books are present day, kind of usually West London. So yeah, they're definitely in the same similar settings and similar universe. Yeah.
Do you ever? I actually spoke to Mark Edwards recently. He's also psychological thriller author.
Yes.
And he, same as you, like all his books are standalones, but he loves to do like he'll have like a character, or like one of the stories that he wrote about is being made into a Netflix movie in the universe.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
like, he does all these just really small kind of Easter egg crossover things.
Oh,
Do you ever do anything like that?
I do not, no. But I could
But
do.
now I
What do you
will.
mean? Well, you mean like putting a character from one book into another book?
Yeah, but not as like, it's never
But
as like a main...
at the hairdresser or something, like something kind of
Exactly,
really innocuous. Yeah.
I think he said, one of his books, the plot of that book was being made into like a true crime doc on Netflix. And in one of his other books, one of the characters was watching the true crime doc of the story that he told in the other book.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's good.
Just fun stuff like that. And I'd love to ask you something I asked him, actually, because I always think it's so interesting with authors who have written several books at this point. You know, you've almost published 10 books at this point, which is a hell of a lot. How do you tackle and this is especially difficult because as you say, they're all standalones, so every new book you write has a new set of characters and it's a new story. How do you tackle the challenge of making sure that it's like fresh and new and you're not retreading the same kind of things that you did in previous novels?
I think it is a real challenge, actually, especially in this genre where I think it's getting tighter and tighter and the requirements are getting more specific. Certainly over the years that I've been with Bookouture, that they certainly have more of an idea of what they want. That's more prescriptive. And there are only so many stories within that, I think. So it gets harder, and it gets harder to think of original twists. But so far, I would say I haven't struggled with the overarching ideas. I always have quite a lot of ideas just bouncing around in my mind. So that's not like the premise. I have lots of those. So that's not any trouble, really. The trouble comes when you're writing the scenes and you want something, you know, how many people have been pushed down the stairs in my novels? A lot. Because you want something that could be an accident or could have, you know, or it could have really, someone that could have pushed you.
Yeah.
There's only, I don't know, maybe I need to watch more movies, try and think of more. But I feel like some of those kind of things where you need that device, there's only so many ways you can do it. And other scenes, like, sometimes I need like a scene in a club where everyone's getting really drunk or something like that. And sometimes when I go to write that scene, I feel like, oh, I think I've written this before. So it's more at a scene by scene basis that it's kind of hard to, I find it a little bit difficult to, you know, or a coffee shop scene. Like, how do I make it different from a coffee shop scene I wrote in a different book, like in terms of describing the background, what's going on.
Yeah.
So that level I find hard personally. I'd love to speak to people who've written like 30 books or something like that and work out how do they do it? How do they make those scenes different in future books? Because you kind of remember, I think, subconsciously, even though I haven't read those books for a long, long time, my other books, I remember subconsciously, and I feel like maybe I'm not writing this as fresh. Maybe I'm almost rewriting the scene that I had in the previous book.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'd love advice on how to do that, to make it, those scenes, individual scenes, different every time. And then, of course, the other thing is character. I think psychological thrillers require a certain type of character as well, because you have to have someone who's made a mistake, usually, or some kind of mistake is helpful. They've got to be a bit flawed. Often, for all the plot twists to happen, they've got to be a bit gullible. So you know, and how many variations on that can you have? Yeah. So I think it is difficult. I try to make my characters reasonably different from each other, but usually they're women in their kind of 30s, and usually with kids. Because I mean, to be honest, I've thought a lot and have started books writing them about women without kids, but kids are such a good device.
Okay.
Because, you know, there can always be a threat to the kid.
Uh-huh.
You know, if you need another plot point, you can put a threat to the kid. So yeah, I do really want to write more about women who don't have kids. living a single lifestyle. But at the moment, I found that I've started books like that, and then I've kind of cheated a bit and added in a kid later on to add in. It's just another layer of tension because there's a threat to the person, obviously the protagonist. But if you add a kid, and also because animals, like the number one rule is you can never hurt an animal. People don't even like animals being threatened to be hurt, so you can't really add an animal and threaten them, but you can threaten a kid and people don't complain. So yeah. So it's quite interesting the kind of boundaries you end up operating within, I think, because they're kind of genre rules. And obviously you don't have to obey every rule. It doesn't work like that. But I think you want to obey most of them if you can.
Yeah. I think it's interesting now that you've mentioned adding children adds this, because obviously, there's the threat of the children being in danger, which is, and then your MC will, it's drop everything because the children are the most important. But there's also an interesting thing with children where the adult characters often don't want to tell them what's happening because they don't want to put that on them. So you get a sort of freebie of why you can have miscommunication, because it's like, oh no, because they're young children and you don't want to tell them about, the bad person or the killer or whatever.
Yeah. That's why it just adds a few more layers, really.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I wonder if we can change topic a little bit here, move on to a bit of more sort of industry publishing stuff. You are with Bookouture, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Very interesting imprint, because I feel like they're part of a sort of evolution of changing a little bit how publishing works. Have you always been with Bookouture throughout your whole publishing career? Okay, so how did you first find them? How did that kind of partnership come about?
Well, it was a bit of a coincidence in a strange sort of a way. So I went to the York Festival of Writing, I think it was in 2017, and I'd signed up. You got these 2 talks with like an agent or publisher as part of your 10-minute kind of pitch sessions as part of your ticket price. And one of them was with a lady called Catherine Torsig, I think that's how you pronounce the name. And she, at the time I signed up, she was with a different publisher, but by the time I saw her, she'd moved to Bookouture. And so I realised she'd moved to Bookouture before I went, and did a bit of research, and I just got really super excited actually by what Bookouture was and what it stood for and how it was different. So I'd self-published one novel before, and I'd kind of struggled with the marketing really, and hadn't got very excited by the marketing. And it felt to me that Bookouture just had this great combination of the kind of skills and mindset of self-publishing, and also the traditional publishing element as well, like all the editing they do. And it just seemed like a perfect fit for me. And then luckily, I was really lucky because she liked the pitch that I gave for my book. Her list was full, so she gave it to another one of her editors who also liked it. And then I got signed. So it was a bit of a coincidence because I hadn't heard of Bookouture until I happened to be meeting her and then looked them up. And I really did feel like I'd felt when I self-published that there was a gap in the market for that kind of publisher who can do the marketing for you and is much quicker and prioritizes digital and has these advantages on traditional publishers in that space. So that's how it happened.
I hear only good things about Bookouture. All of the authors I've had on talking about Bookouture say how supportive they are and all of this stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you have a literary agent?
No, I don't actually. So at the time I had the offer from Bookouture, I also had 2 offers of representation from agents who were really good agents. I really enjoyed talking to them, liked them. They both shared my vision, and it was really exciting talking to them. But I was also so excited by Bookouture, and I felt at the time, and probably to some extent still do now, that there's not as much they can add in that relationship with Bookouture as they could with it. Like there's loads. They would be absolutely incredible and invaluable with a traditional publisher. There was no doubt about that. But I think in that relationship, and bear in mind, I already had the offer, I felt I was happy to go it alone. I think I wanted that direct relationship with the editor. I didn't really want a third person necessarily involved. And to be honest, there's been some scenarios where I think, oh, an agent might be useful, but there's not been any big ones where I've thought, oh, I really need an agent. Certainly not yet. That could all change, of course. But for me, dealing with Bookouture Direct has been a pleasure, really. I've had two editors. I'm about to get a third, and everyone has been amazing. There just haven't been the issues where I feel like I'd need a third party involved.
Yeah, no, that's also the vibe I get, just with the way that Bookouture operates as well, and because obviously they have open submissions. You can submit directly to them as a querying writer. So it all makes sense. Awesome. So far, 100% of the reviews I've heard for Bookouture are good from the authors.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah.
And as we move towards the end of the episode, I do just want to ask, as someone who has been doing this for a while, who has many books out, what advice do you give to authors and the like when people ask you, oh, I'm trying to get into publishing, I've written some stuff, I'm trying to get my work out there, what should I do?
Gosh, I mean, it depends at what stage they're at, really. I mean, I think most of the people that I know who are published certainly wrote a lot of books before they were published, me included. And I think that aspect of just resilience is so important. Like when I say I was about to say not taking no for an answer, but I don't mean when an agent says no, don't take that for an answer. I mean, when someone says no, don't take it as a reflection on you or your writing, particularly unless they have specific feedback, because it's so subjective. And don't take it on a reflection of whether you should continue to write, because everyone can improve. Usually it's just subjective, and it's just kind of keeping going and like submitting the manuscript to lots of agents, to lots of publishers. If that doesn't work, writing another manuscript, trying again a year later, trying again 5 years later. It's all of that, I think, is sometimes underestimated by people. It's not as straightforward as someone has a brilliant book, everyone's going to want to pick it up at all. Yeah. I mean, it's so subjective at every stage, at the agent stage, at the publisher stage, at the reader stage even. And all publishers and agents are trying to predict what readers will want. And everyone knows, I guess, as a reader themselves, what they want. So I think you just have to have a really thick skin and be able to kind of bounce back from every setback, and to know, I mean, the thing that we all have in common, I think, the writers I know, is that we've kept going, and that's probably the main thing we have in common. Obviously we can all write, but it is a skill, I think, that probably, I don't know, but probably can be learned. And certainly you can improve your writing. So that's the thing I would say, like, just don't give up, and don't let anyone make you feel like you should either as well. Yeah.
Because everyone's journeys are so unique. And I've had people on the podcast who wrote their first book and then got accepted by the first agent they spoke to and then got published.
Okay.
But equally, I've had people who have been submitting various different iterations of books for like 10 years, sometimes more.
Yeah, I think that story, that first version of the story, is quite rare, really, when someone submits and the first agent. I've only had that like a couple of times maybe, whereas hundreds of times I think I've had, try, keep trying. So I think I just think if you don't get accepted straight away, it's really not a reflection. It doesn't have to be a reflection on anything.
And there's plenty of very successful, very famous authors around today who talked about, they got their manuscripts got rejected 50 times before anyone accepted them. So you never know this needs. You've got to persevere. That's great. Great advice all around. And that brings us to the final question of the episode, which as always is, Ruth, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you take with you?
Okay, so I've been thinking about this, and I think It would be Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I don't know if you've read that, but it's basically about a woman, Ursula, and she kind of keeps living for a little bit and then is reborn as a baby again. And it sounds bizarre, but it's kind of about, it's so interesting because each time it's about the kind of small things that alter your path that you don't realize. So, and often in the iterations, it feels like she's learnt something. And so she makes a slightly different decision. And the life continues in a different way. And then in other iterations, it's something completely by chance has happened. Like someone's come back from London and then given the family smallpox or something like that, I think is one of the iterations. And it's just such an interesting, I think, reflection on life and how much is in your control and how much is out of your control, and like the small decisions that you make that you really have no idea that they've kind of created this domino effect to get you where you are. So I just think that book could give me so much pause for thought and so much reflection on all her different lives. So I think that's a book that, and also it would allow me to kind of extrapolate a bit and apply it to other people's lives. It just starts, it starts lots of different thought processes for me. So I think if I was on a desert island, I'd need that. So I had lots of different paths to kind of think about.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a sort of like butterfly effect, sliding doors
exactly that
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. That's really interesting. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your writing and working in publishing and all this fun stuff. It's been really cool chatting with you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really interesting and fun. Thank you.
And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Ruth is doing, you can follow her on X, aka Twitter, at RJ Heald, or on Facebook at RJ Heald Author. You can also find her website, ruthheald.com. And to make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can support the show on Patreon, and for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Ruth, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Spin your passion into a business with Shopify and break sales records with the world's best converting checkout. Let's hear that one more time. The world's best converting checkout. Shopify's legendary checkout makes it easier for customers to shop on your website, across social media, and everywhere in between. Now that's music to your ears. Any way you spin it, you can be a smash hit with Shopify. Start your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/records.